It's a matinee Thursday, Jake.
Matinee Thursday. Yeah.
Matinee Thursday. Look how light it is in my room.
a secret pre-recorded show on the same day as a live show, and so there's going to be all the keen-eyed viewers are going to be looking for what clothes we're wearing in the shows and notice that
the state of our facial hair.
Yeah, the state of our facial hair. Everything's going to be the
Tell
angle
us what
of
show
the
you
sun.
think this was also recorded on. Yeah.
But that's fine. We do that.
Although
sometimes.
daylight saving totally screwing up the angle of the sun, right? Because now this is when it's off-nominal early for you.
Yes.
So.
Yes.
And we're spanning like a lot of time zones today, I think, right?
We really are. Yeah.
Where are you calling in from?
I am in Bangalore right now, Bangalore, India.
Bangalore. So that is
Farthest
the voice
off-nominal show we've done. I'm trying to think of.
Ooh.
You might be the record holder.
Maybe. Didn't we have someone?
Well, we had Peter Beck.
Yeah, we had Peter Beck.
Let the Google Map measure this out.
I thought we had one time where a guest like wasn't from that area, but like did the show from like Hong Kong or something. I thought we had that once, didn't we?
I still think we need to Google Maps measure distance this out.
All right, that's homework.
So India is actually right on the opposite side of the globe.
Okay.
So it'll probably be farther.
Hard to get farther away. Yeah, because I'm in Philadelphia, so my antipode is like west of Australia, like where they think that Malaysian flight ended up. It's like the exact opposite side of Earth for me.
That sounds like a conspiracy theory waiting to happen. Yeah.
So then, didn't it happen like 10 years ago? That was a conspiracy theory 10 years ago. Anyway, let's talk. We've got you here today. Pixxel with 2 X's is the topic, and probably some more origin story. Jake was reading, oh, you worked at these other places too, so I feel like we'll probably have some origin story stuff that will be fun to talk about. Jake, did you bring a special off-timed edition drink?
I did, yeah. So it's 10 in the morning for me, so I decided not to go all in on alcohol right now. So I have a cup of coffee, which is normal, but I did slip a little something interesting in it. So I picked this up. This is horchata liqueur, which is a new thing for me. I love horchata, so this was like, okay, well, I'll try this. It's like, it'll be like a Bailey's kind of thing. I was like, it'll be good coffee. Pop it in there.
Yeah, you didn't lay off entirely like you made it sound.
No, just like a little, just a little kicker. But I had a sip already. I gotta say, this is less horchata liqueur and more bubblegum liqueur. That's what it tastes like. So I don't know. This may not be a repeat drink. But
that's a swing and a miss right there. Yeah,
it's a little bit off nominal, but yeah.
I've got a La Colombe draft latte. I'm following you on the coffee front. These things are absolutely delicious. This is such a treat. These little cans are just delicious.
Yeah.
So if you ever see one, I would recommend grabbing it. If you're walking through a convenience store and you're like, oh shit, that's the one that Anthony drinks. It's delicious. That's my strong recommendation. Oh wait, so did you bring anything in particular? Are you got any drinks on or near you?
Water. I mean,
based on where the time zone you're working in, that's probably a smart decision. So
yeah,
we're the other end of the day.
Yeah.
Where should we start, Jake? You want to just do origin story stuff? We haven't had a good origin story in a while.
I think so, yeah. Because, so you're the founder of this Pixxel company, which is based in India, and you have I think that is interesting in and of itself because we don't hear, we're not swimming in Indian space startups in the market today. So maybe we just start with that. Like, who are you? Where did you come from? And how did you arrive at doing work like this?
Absolutely. Just a little bit of clarification. We are a US Indo company, so we do have an office in El Segundo, Los Angeles, Digando, and we have an office in Bangalore. But obviously, the origin of it started in India, and then we kind of expanded to the other side of the world. But in terms of the amount of work that we do, it's almost equal both in US and India. So we call ourselves a US Indo or Indo US company. But the origin story starts almost exactly 6 years ago, the end of February 2019. Now, like most of probably your viewers and yourselves, I was obsessed with space as a kid. Wanted to be an astronaut at some point in time, and then an astronomer and an astrophysicist. So as things got more real and I got a taste of the real world, it went from astronaut to astronomer to astrophysicist. But then life had other plans for me. But I ended up going through these competitive examinations that you have in India that I sort of talk about, and got into an engineering institute that was in the middle of a desert almost, right? And so you have this campus, and then there's like a desert for 4 hours, and then you have New Delhi, which is the closest metro city that you had. But that is where I think I got actual whiff of working with space technology. So there was a student team called Team Anant. Anant means infinity in Sanskrit. And they were working on a small satellite, a CubeSat at that point in time, with the help of scientists at the Indian Space Agency, ISRO. So basically, ISRO had the student satellite program. They used to work with a few universities and train and teach these students on how to actually design, build, operate a satellite. So when I got to know that there was a team like that in college, I was like, okay, yeah, I got to be a part of that. And it was basically like a 4 to 6 month process. You have to write an exam, and then they take you through about 4 months of study, and then once they know you are serious about it, after another set of interviews, you're in. So that's what I did for my first year, and by the end of my second semester, I was in the team. And so I spent a lot of time doing that, building satellites, and working with the hardware that we had rather than going to classes. And then there was an even more interesting experience that was in college. This was in 2017. This was when Elon Musk started tweeting about the traffic in Los Angeles, and then he said, okay, there's a concept called the Hyperloop that we should sort of test out. We'll have this vacuum tube near our headquarters in SpaceX. Let's ask teams from around the world to come build their Hyperloop pods, race within that tube, and see what pans out. And like most engineering kids at that point in time, this was back in 2017. I was also a fan of what Elon had done with SpaceX and with Tesla, and so we're like, is this a chance for us to be able to go and meet Elon? And so we said, okay, let's give it a shot. So we applied for it. Didn't really seriously think we would get through, but to our pleasant surprise, we got through the first stage, and then we had to go through a series of preliminary design review, critical design review, and finally we were given the green light as one of the 20 finalist companies to build this Hyperloop pod. And so now we have to figure out how to actually build something that no one has built before. There's no chat GPT at that point in time. There's no
Oh
how
shit,
to
we won. Now we have to actually do this.
there's no how to guide on Google. You can't just like basically find a single source of saying how you build a Hyperloop pod. Now then you have to figure out from first principles exactly how do you build the levitation system, the braking system, the entire structure. And we managed to do that in a span of 3 months in Bangalore at that point in time during our summer holidays. We brought that pod to Los Angeles at the SpaceX headquarters, and we were able to present it to Elon himself and the rest of the SpaceX team, and very, very crucial and formative learning experience for me. But you coming to the origin story, it was while we were there at SpaceX. They took us on a tour of the SpaceX factory. So looking at those rocket engines being built and the Falcon 9 booster that they keep in front of their headquarters in Hawthorne, that was the eureka moment for me. That wow, I think a private company is doing all of this. And it was started as a small company a couple of decades ago. And From there, I kind of made up my mind that look, if we as a team of students could build a Hyperloop pod, satellite should be easier because there were a lot more resources on it. Turned out it was not the case. Just because there's more resources and more people that have worked on it, that it was easier. But naivety gets you started, and so came back from there into college. I read about everything from asteroid mining to rockets to space stations, and then a lot of it was not really possible for a college student without a lot of money. But satellite data and imagery seemed like there was a lot of it coming down. And while working with different sources of data, realized that okay, existing satellite data doesn't cut it. We need something better, and so that's what we're doing at Pixxel. We're building and launching the world's highest resolution hyperspectral satellites, which help us see 50 times more information than current satellites.
Nailed it. Great.
How did you settle in on that as the direction, like hyperspectral imaging in particular, right? Because that was, think back to, late 2010s, right? There's planets up and running with probably a couple hundred satellites at that point. You've got Maxar working on their Worldview Legion satellites still. That's been going on for years. What were the kind of like metrics that you took at the market to figure out which kind of imagery you were going to go after?
Yeah, I think, look, honestly, I was just trying to figure out any problem that I could work on in space, right? It wasn't like a typical startup where is there an actual problem? I'm like, no, I want to work in space. Let's try and cram this interest into a problem that there might be. But I think Planet and what they had done was a lot of inspiration, right? They had figured out how to use these shoebox-sized CubeSats and sent, as you said, 200 of them or so to space and be able to downlink that. And Maxar had been doing that for the last three decades in the 1990s. But I think while working with this data, came across three resolutions we talk about from space. You have spatial resolution, temporal resolution, and spectral resolution. Now, spatial resolution is where Maxar really shines, 30 centimeters, 50 centimeters, and so on. How clearly can you see and zoom into a thing and zoom into an image? That's one. Then you have temporal, which is where Planet did really great job, where they said we will put 200 satellites and we will have a daily imagery of every part of the planet. But what was missing was the spectral resolution. How much spectra, how much more of the electromagnetic spectrum can you see? If I have a broken bone and I go to a doctor can't use a normal camera to be able to see what's happening inside. You have to go to the different part of the electromagnetic spectrum, see it through X-rays. So while this is not X-rays, this is on the other side, the infrared spectrum, being able to split light into hundreds of wavelengths and be able to see it. I think that was the concept, that was the calculus of figuring out, let's not go and compete with what Maxar is already doing. Let's not go and compete with what Planet is already doing. Let's try and figure out something new that will add as an additional metric or an additional dimension to what satellite imagery is already providing. But in fact, that's what we tell the investors actually. But the honest part was, I came across hyperspectral imaging when I was reading about asteroid mining, and at some point I really want to go and mine asteroids that's out there, and hyperspectral imaging was one of those sensors that you use to actually see what's on an asteroid. Is it made of metal? Is it made of something carbonaceous? Does it have water vapor in it which you can use as fuel? And so when I was reading about that, I was like, wow, hyperspectral imaging, can we actually turn this back on the Earth? And turns out that people had already done that. So we had NASA that already launched a hyperspectral satellite. So the concept was proven, and the plan was like, let's start with looking at the Earth, and then hopefully sometime in the future we can look at other planetary bodies.
So I have to always preface what I'm going to say, because the hyperspectral stuff like melts my brain a little bit. Like, I'm not good with the spectrum. I think I should be, like, all the different stuff I've done reading about Mars science and all that kind of stuff, but still just like I can't do it. So just correct me if I say something really dumb here. But my question
when you say something really
when
dumb.
I say something super dumb, leap on me. No, so you talk about find this place in the market where there's a gap, right? And it's hyperspectral. My question is that because there was just nothing on that side of the spectrum, like it was all visible light or something else, or is it because the existing hyperspectral imagery didn't have enough resolution? Like, are you going to a new place on the spectrum, or are you on the same place just adding more zeros to your resolution?
Where
Yeah,
where on the spectrum are you? Is Jake's
Where
question.
on the spectrum is your spectrum? Yeah.
hopefully not on the autism one. But I think so. The spectrum was already being covered. So you actually had Sentinel that covers all the way up to, I think, 2,200 or 2,300 nanometers, which is in the shortwave infrared range. But it does so with only about 13 wavelengths in total. Right, so there's a lot of gaps in between the electromagnetic spectrum. So the electromagnetic spectrum is a continuous spectrum. Humans can only see in the visible range and only about three very discrete wavelengths. We are not seeing the continuous spectrum. We're only seeing red, green, and blue as huge blobs of these wavelengths. And then Sentinel, which is the best in terms of the multispectral resolution, has about 13 or so. Maxar also has about 6 or 8 or so, right? But they cover the range. They covered the visible range, the near infrared range, and the shortwave infrared range. So we're going out further in the infrared range. What was missing was 13 wavelengths or 8 wavelengths are not enough. You need hundreds of wavelengths, and the reason for hundreds of wavelengths is you are splitting that continuous spectra into very minute slices. So think of a loaf of bread, and instead of cutting like three big loaves which you can't really stuff into your mouth, you are having very thin slices that basically cover that entire spectrum, which is what gives rise to those hundreds of lines. And That's what hyperspectral sort of gives. So you are basically able to capture the minute differences in the spectra due to that thin slicing that you would not be able to get if you had a very coarser resolution.
Right. So if Sentinel's doing, I'm going to make up numbers, if they're doing 10 and 20 and 30 nanometers of wavelength, you're doing
Yeah.
10.1 and 10.2 and 10.3 and 10 point, like you're filling in all the little spaces in there.
Exactly. So the width of each of the wavelengths of Sentinel, for example, is 60 nanometers or 100 nanometers, right? So it's very wide. Whereas we have between 2 nanometers to 10 nanometers, right? So we basically, if they only had one wavelength, which is from 900 to 960 nanometers, we basically would have at least 6 wavelengths: 900 to 910, 910 to 20, 20 to 30, and so on.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Okay. All right. So you're filling in space at a much bigger, much higher level of detail is the
Correct.
short story. Yeah. All right.
So when you were approaching the market, right, you have all of your examples were government institutions launching satellites in hyperspectral space. Was that did that get that way because it was very expensive to build those satellites with this resolution before, or are you exploratory in that, like, all right, who's actually going to buy it that isn't a government, or even if government is your customer, they're commercial customers. Agriculture is one I always see related to hyperspectral.
Yeah.
Have you kind of figured out that there was a market there that was underserved, or was it a? We know it's there; it's just too expensive to serve it.
So the market was there because in the end you're trying to solve for the use cases. So for example, if $500 billion worth of crops are lost every year because of crop diseases and pest infestations, it's because you can't detect them, right? And multispectral satellites cannot detect a crop disease or a pest infestation before the symptoms show up. So you basically need to have roughly a 3 to 4 week advance notice that multispectral imagery was not providing. So when we started, there were probably 3 or 4 hyperspectral satellites that a few space agencies had launched. So you had one that NASA had launched called Earth Observing One, which had a hyperspectral camera called Hyperion. This was decommissioned around 2017 or so, right? So we had a bunch of data that it had beamed down that we could work with to see what hyperspectral actually shows us from space, but it was at 30 meters resolution. It probably cost more than $50 million, maybe close to $100 million. It took about 5 6 years for them to sort of build it, so it was expensive. It took time, and but they'd proven that the concept works. And then around 2016, 17, 18, and 19, you had two more satellites that went up. One was the Prisma satellite that the Italian Space Agency launched, which was also at a 30-meter resolution, which also cost tens of millions of dollars in many, many years. And then you had the Indian Space Agency launching HISIS, which was a hyperspectral satellite that again was 30 meters in resolution, took many, many years and tens of millions of dollars. Um, but then when we looked at it, we were like, look, 30 meters doesn't really cut it. When we talk to customers in the agriculture domain, in the oil and gas domain, in the mining domain, and the government, they told us that, yeah, we have these 2 or 3 sources of data. One, it's not regular enough. It only comes in once a month or so. And they can't really
Hmm.
task that satellite for their area. So that was a big problem because if they can't task your own, you can't task your own area, you can't solve your own problems. One. But even on top of that, even if they could have tasked that satellite, 30 meters resolution was not good enough to be able to see some things, right? If you're looking at an oil and gas pipeline, 30 meters is too big for you to know exactly where you're looking at and where something might be. And if you're looking at Africa or India, where you have smallholder farmers, you can't even distinguish between multiple farms to know which farm has a problem and sort of what is being grown where. So the resolution was, I think, the bigger issue, and we said, okay, 30 meters doesn't cut it. We need to be able to get to 10 meters at least, because that's what our customers told us. We reached, I sent out cold emails and LinkedIn emails to a bunch of folks and asked them, hey, you're procuring satellite data today, you're paying something to them. What are you paying them? Are you going to buy hyperspectral? Is it like a need for you, or is it a nice to have? And if you were to pay hyperspectral, would you pay a little bit more for it? And the feedback was kind of overwhelmingly positive to our surprise. They said, oh, we've been experimenting with hyperspectral, but it's been on drones, and that doesn't give us a large area, so we need it from a satellite.
Hmm.
But you need to give it at a 10-meter resolution, or ideally a 5-meter resolution. Now, building a 5-meter camera was not possible with the technology even 10 years ago or 7 years ago. So that was a part of what we had to figure out to get it to 5 meters. So the resolution part is important. But even before the resolution, it was figuring out how do you cram that into a small satellite, because a small satellite is cheaper to build, faster to build, and therefore also cheaper to launch, because then that leads to the business model. If you're spending $100 million in building a satellite and you can only generate that revenue over 5 years, by the time your satellite is ending, you've barely made money on that satellite. But if you're spending a few couple $1 million on a satellite and then you are operating it for 5 to 7 years, then you've recouped the cost within the first year, and then it pays back more than what you paid for it. So I think that was the rough calculus when we were looking at it. So one, we had to make it cheaper and smaller, and second, we had to increase the resolution while doing sort of 5 meters. And we decided to take it from first principles and break it down and figure out how to build that.
Mm-hmm. I'm always interested with a service like this, and I have the same kind of like fascination with Planet too, which is like you have this sort of like 3 segments of the business, right? Like you can go after like the big government kind of things, which is always lucrative, but it's a small market in that sense, so you get huge injections of cash every once in a while. And then you have like these kind of larger organizations, larger corporations, probably what you talk about, like, oil companies, mining companies, these larger groups that need this kind of data. But I'm always kind of fascinated when you get closer to like the retail side, and Planet kind of does this. Like, an individual farmer can go to Planet and be like, I want to buy a picture of my farm every day for the year so I can see what's going on there. Do you plan on kind of getting into that sort of realm as well, where it's like down to an individual, an individual buying this data? Like, is it retail satellite imagery? I guess is what it is, right?
Yeah, you can do that today. Actually, you can go to aurora.pixel.space. You can create an
Mm.
account, and you can start tasking our satellite. So we are obviously a few years behind Planet in terms of the maturity of the business and what scale we are at, because they started in, I believe, 2013. We started in 2019, and we just very recently launched our commercial satellites. But we do have the same capability. Yes, you will have a few retail customers coming in and sort of trying it out, but that's not really where the business is made. Obviously, we make more money in the B2B deals that we have, long-term deals
Always.
that we have. But absolutely, I think anyone can come in and sort of use it on the platform that we have. In fact, we've gone a step further today and integrated an LLM in the platform as well. So you can just actually go in and type it out, and it'll tell you exactly how to place an order. And in a couple of weeks, you can actually type out an order, and it'll place an order for you without having to go through a clicking your mouse phase.
Wow.
I'm
No
setting up
mouse
our
click
organization
allowed.
account right now, Jake.
Oh, are you?
I'm
Okay.
doing it. Hold on. I'm doing it live.
We're gonna get a hyperspectral image of the next meetup is what's gonna happen. So.
See exactly how drunk Jake was.
Yeah.
What color did he turn?
What hyperspectral color did I turn? Yeah. Okay,
What was
so let
the?
me ask. I was I was
You
gonna ask
go, because I
a
still got to
hard.
set up our organization. I'm
Yeah, I
procrastinating.
was covering for you, man. Come on. I'm going to ask you a really tough question then. What stops Planet from adding a hyperspectral camera to their satellites going forward and totally eating your lunch? Like, what do you do to stay competitive with that?
Yeah, I think the good thing is that this industry, if you're building hardware in a space industry, it's by default you have a moat because it's very, very complex and time consuming and capital consuming to build something, right? So even for a company as big as Planet. So let me actually, I don't have to speak in hypotheticals. Planet actually is wading into hyperspectral. They launched the first of their hyperspectral satellite last year. I think October was the month. It was a 30-meter resolution satellite, 30. We have a 5-meter satellite up there, so we are about 6 times better, while being cheaper and sort of all of that. But I think it's the reason we could do that is we decided very early on to build a really strong team of people that had worked on hyperspectral, and there are not a lot of those folks out in the world.
Mm.
And we decided to completely focus our efforts on building that and then go at it. And we have spent the last 3.5, 4 years doing various iterations of a hyperspectral camera. We had to start at 30 meters like everyone else did, like Planet did, like NASA did, like ISRO did. And then we got into a second iteration at 10 meters resolution, and that took a lot of effort and development from 30 to 10. And then finally, that gave us all of the info and learnings we needed to build a 5-meter camera. So Planet, absolutely, they are a very talented team. I have massive respect for them. So I believe if they devote their time and money and effort, they can do it. But it will take them 12 to 18 months to be able to replicate sort of where we are, because that's just how long it takes to test out on hardware, see how it's performing, use that knowledge to iterate and then sort of build and launch it up to space. So even for a company of their scale and size, probably an 18 to 24-month catch-up period, I would say, and that's what really means that while we focus on hyperspectral, we can keep that gap going. I would probably only give SpaceX, probably they can do it in 10 to 12 months. They're the only team that I believe moves at insane speed. So I would say 12 to 24 months is roughly what it'll take anyone to catch up, because it's just so complex to build it and so complex to test it, and then you can't just shortcut that.
So you just got to keep moving then.
Moving, yeah.
Oh, that's the name of the game, I guess. Eh? Cool. So then the reverse question: can you later add visible spectrum to your cameras and eat planets
Yeah,
lunch?
we can have spectral cameras. I mean, we can't do it in the same satellite, but yes, we can replace the camera and yeah, with a hyperspectral camera with a multispectral camera. Absolutely. But I think we don't have a technical advantage there. Planet has done a good job with their satellites. We have a bunch of other companies like Black Sky and Satellogic as well doing that. I think we do have a very big cost advantage, being that we build a lot of our satellites in Bangalore, so we can do it for about 1/5 the price to 1/10 the price of what it takes it in the US for some of our competitors to do. So maybe at some point, I'm not saying no, not right now. We want to focus on hyperspectral, but maybe in 2-3 years we would want to
Yeah.
expand to other.
Yeah. So, what are some of the like interesting use cases for this? We've talked a little bit, kind of like hypothetically, farms, mines, and stuff. But like, what is what is something that you just like you can't get anywhere else? Like what really makes hyperspectral like such a valuable commodity, right?
Great. Let me talk about one of the agreements that we have in India with the Ministry of Agriculture. Now, India is a little bit of a peculiar nation because there's very, very small farmer holdings, right? You have less than probably a 10-meter square plot that one farmer is doing, and then just beside that someone else, and they're all growing different stuff. So unlike in the US and Europe where you have some level of continuity, that if wheat is growing here, wheat is growing sort of everywhere. If corn is growing here, there's a bunch of corn that's growing. Not the case in India. So you need to be able to identify the exact species of crop that is growing where, and also the subspecies of crop. Is it this kind of rice or that kind of rice? Is it this kind of wheat or that kind of wheat? And I think so crop species identification becomes important as a census standpoint, because they need to know how much of a crop is being grown this year and what is the potential yield going to be for every species. And because of the spectral signatures that a hyperspectral camera can capture, it's the only data set that can tell you specifically which species of crop you're looking at, and similarly for a forest as well, which very specific species of tree you're looking at. So I think that's very unique use case there. The other example I alluded to earlier was crop diseases and pest infestation. So right now with multispectral data that Planet provides or other provides, you can do something called a NDVI. You can generate an NDVI, a natural differentiated vegetation index, which tells you how healthy the crop is. A rough indication of whether it's green, yellow, or red, healthy somewhere in between, and not healthy. But you can't tell exactly what's causing that and why is that. With hyperspectral, let's say you have wheat rust that has started some place. You can very specifically say that this crop is wheat and then it has rust disease, and very specifically identify that from some other disease. So, and this happens about 3 to 4 weeks before the symptoms actually start to show up in NDVI. So before NDVI can and tell you, you're actually looking at exactly what's happening within the leaves of the crop, and that there's a crop disease, which and 3 to 4 weeks is a big difference for farmers to go and sort of make a difference in how much it has spread. So that's a couple of examples in the agriculture domain. Maybe let's take mining. Everyone's trying to figure out who has rare earth minerals. Is there cobalt here? Is there lithium? Do we have uranium or thorium or anything else for nuclear purposes? Hyperspectral can identify exactly which mineral you're looking at, like very specifically. A very cool example I like to take is if you just search USGS, which is United States Geological Survey, Afghanistan hyperspectral, you will see that the USGS flew a hyperspectral airplane over the entire country of Afghanistan probably a decade ago when they were still sort of occupying it. And then they found $1 trillion worth of new mineral deposits through hyperspectral data that they were not earlier finding it through other prospecting methods. Imagine doing that for the entire world, knowing exactly which mineral is where, and so that the mining companies don't then have to go and deforest areas where they don't need to be looking at. So I would say that is a good example in mining. In oil and gas, it's about oil leaks and gas leaks. Whenever there's a methane leak, we can identify a methane leak because it's invisible.
Mhm.
Otherwise, we can also see an underground oil leak. We can't really see the leak, but what we can tell you is that the soil characteristic has drastically changed. So this soil signature that we were seeing earlier, which was just soil, now has changed to this, which is because of the oil penetrating there, means that there is an underground leak. So maybe a few examples that I can give you, but apart from that, there's many more. We can identify how hot a volcano is to blowing up, and sort of where the lava is flowing. We can look at potential risk for forest fires. We can identify borders and see who's moving around real tanks and fighter jets and so on. So the use cases are many, but the data set is the same.
Jeez.
How does the mining one there work? Like in terms of identifying minerals, is that purely things that you can see from the surface, or is it similar to what you're talking about with the soil quality and the indications that you get on minute changes?
Yeah, so we can't penetrate with hyperspectral data, so it's not a penetrative data set. We can only see what's on the surface. But most minerals have something on the surface. We can't tell you how big the ore is. For that, you need to be able to actually drill it and prospect it and see how big the ore is. But you can tell that this
Like a
mineral
tip of the
traces of
iceberg kind of situation.
exactly have been found here. There are quite a few others that are not found on the surface, but then you have what you call indicator minerals for those. So if I recall the example correctly, I think wherever you find diamonds or gold, you also find kaolinite around, right? So if you're able to find kaolinite, which is on the surface, you have a better indication that there's likely gold or diamonds around, because of the geological processes. They are formed in fairly similar regions.
It feels like some Minecraft knowledge right there. I feel like that felt like I was playing Minecraft again. How to find
Man, can you,
diamond and
can
gold.
you imagine going back in time, like you only 100 years ago, and like going up to a farmer and being like, "Hey, how do you find out if your crops are diseased?" And they go, "Well, I walk out there and I look at the leaves and I smell this and I check this." And it's like, "Well, what if I told you that in just 4 generations, we're gonna look at it from space with a machine that flies around the Earth at 28,000 kilometers an hour? How do you like that idea? Like,
And knows a month before you do.
yeah, like can detect it."
Actually, there was a very cool example. So there are a few companies doing gene editing for seeds, right? So you have these seeds whose genes they edit. So whenever it's stressed or whenever it has a disease, it glows up in the infrared range. And hyperspectral cameras that we have can see in the infrared range. So for satellites, basically, it's glow in the dark. That it makes it even easier because of the gene editing that's there. It's fairly cool.
That's wild.
All right, that's
That is my insane fact for
how did
the
they?
next month.
Yeah, so did they? I guess somebody realized they could pull this off, and so then they could make use of. Was it hyperspectral data or infrared imaging that they were doing already? Like, what was the? They had to know both of these things are possible. It's my problem, right? This is like a chicken or the egg problem. Like, they had to know they could get this imagery so that they went and CRISPR'd it up in that it would.
Or could you like take a handheld I don't know, UV light and just walk around the field and shine it on leaves
Oh,
and go,
nice.
"Oh, found one."
You can use a handheld spectrometer to be able to actually see these things. And I think the golden egg basically is if you can actually have crops really glow in the dark in the visible range when something's gone wrong. So visually you can see it, but until then we are stuck with it glowing in the infrared range. Yeah.
That one might be a little harder to solve.
Also, just sounds awesome generally. Like,
this
I'd like
luminescent
the plants in my house to do that. Like, when I turn off the lights, the plants light the hallways. Like, that just sounds pretty rad generally. So there's a big market for that. If not just farming.
Yeah.
Yeah, at some point we can have our genes edited, so every time we are stressed, we glow up.
We'd have a lot of glowing people over on this side of Earth. Yeah.
You would ruin a lot of dark sky zones, that's for sure. I'm still thinking about that.
Glow in the dark plants.
Edit the genes.
Gene editing so that the satellites see them better is like such 2020s thinking. That's so good.
Yeah.
I love that.
I feel like there's a Black Mirror episode you could make out of all this. Yeah.
Can we talk about the hardware a bit too? Because I'm curious, when you're talking about controlling for cost and figuring out how to fit it in a smaller package, was there a particular component or thing that you had to solve that was the trickiest about that? And did it drive the ultimate size of the satellites that you're building?
It did, yeah. So I think we took a little bit of an opposite approach to Planet. When they started with their Dove satellites, they said, okay, satellites are getting standardized, so we will pick a 3U CubeSat size and try and cram as best a camera as we can into this size. So the satellite size decided the camera size, that decided the image quality. Whereas we decided, okay, I think they've already done the temporal resolution bit. We don't need to sort of standardize it. Let's ask our customers what they want. So we first decided what the image quality needs to look like. That decided what the camera needs to be designed around. And so I think that was really where we could control how big the satellite could be, how cheap it could be, and so on. So basically what you're building is a spectrometer, right? So when James Webb Space Telescope, the second image that it captured was being able to say that there's water vapor content in this exoplanet that's many, many light years away. The reason they were able to say that is because it's a spectrometer. You're able to see what spectra is coming in from every molecule, and it gives you that. So hyperspectral imager is basically a spectrometer that images stuff. Now, there are multiple ways of building a spectrometer. The most common way and the only way that was used earlier by NASA, by other space agencies, was to build a spectrometer where you have the optics. So you need to have lenses and mirrors that capture the light and try to focus it to a detector. But in between the detector, which is converting your photons into electrons, and then everything that we see as zeros and ones, you have a spectrometer, which basically means you have some things like gratings or prisms. So it's like a prism. So you have light coming in, and then a prism basically makes it a rainbow. Similarly, it's prism but for hyperspectral, where you have gratings and prisms that are splitting the light into many, many wavelengths. So this is a very voluminous contraption, the way that you sort of need to do that, because you have to split so many wavelengths of light, and then you're losing a lot of quality of imagery because the dispersion of light is causing the quality to drop and so on. We decided, I think we looked at and researched what was happening in material science and detectors and spectrometers and all of that, and we thought, I think there's a different way to do it from space. And before us, no one had sort of done that. You have the optics, which remain the same. You need to basically capture the photons and then focus it, so that remains the same. The detector is a detector which converts photons into electrons. But instead of all of this contraption in between, we said we will just deposit these filters on top of our detector, which, due to their material properties, reflect all the light except they let only a specific wavelength go through, depending on their thickness and depending on the material. So if you lay out a series of filters, basically, think of it like jello sheets, one on top of the other, a combination of them will let light through of different wavelengths. So the detector now is capturing hundreds of wavelengths because of varying thickness and material properties and so on, all of that. So basically all that to say that instead of a very voluminous contraption called the spectrometer, we decided we'll build filter based hyperspectral cameras, and that took a lot of time and effort, but that made the camera much smaller because you don't have all of these things in between. And after we had spent the initial R&D money on sort of figuring it out, the camera also became cheaper per system to build compared to a spectrometer. And so the smaller camera means a smaller satellite. A smaller satellite means a cheaper satellite, and therefore a smaller satellite also means lower launch cost because you're paying your launch cost on the basis of how big your satellite is.
And
cool.
are there any trade-offs with that, using that instead of dispersing the wavelengths across the way the spectrometer does? Is there any drawbacks or things that you're losing by doing it through the filtering mechanism?
You just need to use more lines. I think double the number of lines of the sensor compared to normal spectrometer. But you basically have everything advantages. Your signal to noise ratio is bigger because you're not dispersing light. The camera is smaller. Eventually, it's sort of cheaper. So you're not losing anything on the quality, and you can make up for the number of lines. So that's the only trade-off that sort of comes with that. Yeah.
Do you think that is this an area that is gonna like come from the space industry and be useful not on satellites too? Like, is there could you see this going into either other packages or other industries in a beneficial way?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think spectral cameras
iPhone
have a lot of
17. You know,
hopefully not on an iPhone. God save us all. But I think you can use it in the medical domain quite a bit. Like hyperspectral spectrometers are used for identifying cancerous cells from normal cells because they reflect different spectra.
They
Um,
glow in the dark. Yeah.
the glow in
yeah,
the dark cancer cells. Yeah. That's so that when they
and
designed COVID in that lab, they made it glow in the dark. Actually, when you
Yeah.
get
Exactly.
it. So, yeah.
yeah, yeah, but it's also used in the food processing industry. You can basically keep it in the food line and then see if fruits that are coming out of there are rotten or not from the inside,
Hmm.
or basically any other kind of food materials. I think those are the two industries where there's a lot of scope for uptake.
That's cool. So tell us about your first couple of launches here. So you have some hardware in space. I want to hear about what. Well, I think you had like a first or a second one kind of a while ago, and then recently you've got like the big three pack,
Correct.
of the demonstration set. So yeah, tell us about that.
Yeah, so we started with a demonstration satellite in 2021 that was a 30-meter satellite. So we matched what NASA had done and a few other space agencies had done. We did it at about 120 at the cost and at a smaller size and all of that, but we were standing on top of giants, right? NASA basically invented this technology and so on and so forth. So but 30 meters, we said we're going to match what was out there, but we're going to do it at a fraction of the cost, and we're going to do it at very small satellite. That was done in 2021, and then we used the learnings from that to launch two satellites in 2022, which were of a 10-meter resolution. So we made it about 3 times better. But all of these were demo satellites. They were not meant to last there long. Their lifetime was roughly about 18 to 24 months. They were supposed to beam down just a few images, a week, and then the revisit time over any area was roughly 2 weeks or so. So it wasn't great for commercial use cases, but it proved the entire technology that we wanted to give us the lessons. Finally, all of those lessons culminated in us building a 5-meter camera, which went on a hyperspectral satellite. These were our commercial satellites. So we're calling them the Fireflies. So there are two constellations that we're building: the Fireflies and the Honeybees. The Honeybees will come later; they're bigger, better versions. But as of now, the Fireflies were what we built last year, and there were 6 of these satellites. Why did we build 6? Because with 6 satellites, we can revisit any point on the globe every 24 hours. Which means if I'm taking an image of Philadelphia today, I can come back and relook at it in exactly 24 hours. And that holds true whether Philadelphia is changed with New York, or whether it's Los Angeles, whether it's Tokyo, Auckland, anywhere in the globe. So that is why 6 was important to us, because it got us to a level where we could deliver a daily image like Planet does to any of our customers anywhere, and do it globally. And out of those 6, in January, we put 3 of those satellites up there. So 3 more will go up around April or so next month when the SpaceX launch goes up. And 3 went up in January with the SpaceX launch. The good thing is all those 3 satellites are working. They have a 7-year lifetime compared to an 18-month lifetime that the demos had. They have more than 200 times the daily capacity to be able to beam down data and imagery and to capture a lot more area. So I think that's the launches that we have done till date. In fact, a very cool fact is in 2022 when we launched our 10-meter hyperspectral satellite, there was one more hyperspectral satellite on the same Falcon 9 rocket. This was a satellite that was being built by the German agency DLR. The difference was that that satellite program started in 2002. 2002. I was 5 years old then. We started building our satellite in 2021. Their satellite cost close to 100 million euros to build over the course of those many years. It weighed close to 1,000 kilograms, and it was a 30-meter resolution satellite. Our satellite weighed 20 kilograms. It was three times better in terms of its resolution at 10 meters, and it took about 14 to 16 months to build, right? So I think that's the new space industry where you can sort of move fast and sort of, it could have failed for sure. We didn't put in the same level of reliability that probably the bigger satellite did, but I think when you move fast and prove something, then you can move even faster. So yeah.
Yeah. That's the name of the game right now. That's the grand unifying space narrative right now. These companies move faster. Yeah, I'm curious because you went up on a transporter, right? It was like a rideshare
That's right.
thing, right? How does that work with your? I always like to hear customers talk about this, just because the concept of rideshare, I'm fascinated by it. It seems to be like such an interesting point in time right now. We're at this kind of like golden era of rideshare, but the drawback,
And occasionally
of course,
they sound like total messes.
and
Like
occasionally they sound like total messes.
everybody comes
yeah,
off at the same time and it's chaos.
Yeah, and like your satellite comes off and sees another hyperspectral satellite, so you kind of like elbows up and get them out of the way a little
Bumper
bit.
cars it.
See if you can knock it out. But no, just
Some road
getting to
rage.
getting to your target orbit is always, of course, the trade-off there, right? Because everyone wants to go somewhere different, but the rocket's going to one place. How do you handle that? And I'm just kind of curious to know your perspective on that trade-off, like the cost savings you get from a rideshare versus the extra work and time or whatever you have to spend to move your satellite to its destination.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. So SpaceX is by far the cheapest launch provider in the world right now. Maybe a history lesson. Before SpaceX came in, the price per kilogram for a ride share was roughly between $20,000 per kilogram to $25,000 per kilogram, right? And that was the cheapest out there. And then SpaceX came in and said, we will do these ride share launches, and the price is very straightforward. You just make sure you come on time, you sit in your slot, and we will put you in orbit, and you pay us $5,000 per kilogram. So now inflation adjusted everything, now it's roughly about $6,000 per kilogram, but it's still about 1/5 of $25,000 per kilogram that we had to pay before. So that changed the game, and now companies are trying to bring it down, but you can't without losing money. So the options are either you get on a ride share with someone else and you're still paying 2 times to 3 times what SpaceX is charging, and you still are a ride share. And SpaceX is launching so often now that you have 4 launch opportunities which are dedicated ride shares, more opportunities if you're willing to go on someone else as a primary satellite. So there are very regular launches, and so you know that SpaceX will go up on time, and generally it won't blow up. That's not the case with others, where you don't know if they're going to go up that often because you're dependent on the primary satellite. The other option is you can book out a dedicated launch vehicle for the smaller satellite, like a Rocket Lab, Electron rocket, for example, or any of the new ones that are coming out. But then that becomes way more expensive because you're not paying for an entire rocket. You can launch only about 150 to 300 kilograms, depending on which rocket you're looking at, and they end up costing between $6 million to $8 million or $10 million per rocket because you have to pay for the entire rocket. You can't have a ride share, but you control the timeline, you control exactly where you're going to. So it's like instead of paying about, and we did this cost calculus, it's roughly 5 times to 10 times more expensive to do a dedicated launch than it is to go with a ride share. So the trade-off ends up working for us because we just add little bit of additional fuel on this satellite so that we can move up and down in the altitude if we need. They drop us at a certain altitude. We just need to make sure that we correct for the altitude and go up or down, and then we operate from there. Plane change maneuvers are obviously different. So we just tend to choose those SpaceX launches which go to a sun synchronous orbit because we need to be in a sun synchronous orbit. We don't go on the launches that are going to the inclined orbit. And generally it works out because most imaging satellites have to go in sun synchronous, the rest of the folks go on incline. And as long as you've built your satellite to make sure it can survive in space, and doesn't matter if 100 satellites are coming out of there in orbit or so, you can make sure that you're communicating with your satellite like we've been able to do over the last few weeks. But I think it's basically a train. You just have to make sure your satellite is ready on time, and you show up to the SpaceX facility on time, and they will deliver you from point A to point B. Now you figure out where you want to go from point to B.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess with certain key orbits, sun synchronous being one of them. I imagine, although geo would theoretically be one, although I don't know how much use there is for smaller sats out there. But these kind of like linchpin orbits where they're like there's a very specific inclination you go to, and everyone's in the same spot, and that's why it's useful, right? That seems to be like the optimal use case for ride shares, because like you said, like you could have an entire ride share where everyone wants to go the exact same inclination, and there's no compromise at that point, right?
Like, almost every imaging satellite that has global coverage requirements goes to a sun synchronous orbit. That's like a given.
Mm-hmm.
You just know how to figure, which of the rockets are there. And out of the 4 rideshare rockets a year, at least 2 of them, or sometimes 3 of them, go to a sun synchronous orbit. So you have fairly good optionality.
Yeah. That's the popular one.
Is the decision? It's interesting, right? Because some imaging constellations like having a couple of satellites at that mid inclination orbit, right? Black Sky likes to have those 45, 50 degree inclination. They want to cover where most of the humans live on Earth more frequently. So they've got a couple. I think they have a couple sun synchronous, but then they've layered in their mid inclination. Is that combo something that you see in the future, or is the revisit time, being able to compare like one for one over the course of a day or several days, the benefit there from being in sun synchronous that you're getting the same locals time every time you come through? Does that outweigh the more frequent revisits you get at mid inclination?
Yeah, I think it depends on what kind of constellation you are. We are more of a monitoring constellation. We monitor almost every part of the landmass every day. Like, we're going to take an image of the Amazon rainforest almost every week, regardless of whether someone's asking for it or not, right? Because we have a lot of capacity, and we need to be painting the Earth to see how the snapshot of the Earth has changed over many months and years. With Black Sky, they're more of a tasking satellite. You have clients coming to them and telling, we need you to image this, and so they need to have the revisit capability to come over that area, because they are more focused towards defense and intelligence, because or
Yeah.
infrastructure. That's the kind of satellite that they're building and launching. So I think it depends on the use case. So for us, the core constellation will be a sun synchronous satellite, because that gives us optionality anywhere on the globe, as well as to not just to be able to deliver an image that has been tasked, but also just monitor the Earth and what's happening. But once the core of 18 satellites is built out for us, we also plan on springing around a few in the inclined orbits, because then we get very high revisit over certain areas that then we can use for tasking purposes.
Yeah, you could be
Mm-hmm.
opportunistic about those, whereas the others
Correct.
are more kind of steady state operations.
Yeah.
Correct.
Well, yeah, because you're right. Like, there are some of the use cases we talked about, agriculture being one of them, that will be concentrated closer to the equator than it will be to the poles, right? We're going to have more agriculture happening in
Well,
mid latitudes.
I don't know, man. It's getting better to grow shit higher up on the
It
Earth
is.
these days.
Yeah,
So
that window's
don't count
expanding
that
a little
out.
bit.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully Awais can find all the methane leaks, and we can slow that one down a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's beyond our control now. We can detect all the leaks that are happening, but then the Earth's on a different trajectory.
Yeah, still got to plug them, right? Oh wow, cool. Okay, so you said there's another launch coming up in April or so. We're looking forward to.
That's right. Yeah, April or May, depending on when SpaceX sends that up. The exact date isn't showed up yet, but sometime in the next couple of months.
That's cool. All right.
So
well, we'll
you've
look forward
got 3 went up, the next 3 are coming. You said 18 is the initial constellation. Are you building that whole batch as a single run, or are you still working on the later half of that?
We built 6 already, so that was the initial run. Now we're building 12 more.
And then is there a kind of cadence that you expect beyond that, or I don't even know how many kilometers up you got, right? These are not coming down sun synchronous. You're typically going to be up 600, 700, 800 kilometers. I assume you're somewhere up there. 5, all right. But you're not in like I guess you are kind of roughly in the Starlink territory. Where are you expecting a certain amount of deorbits over every couple of years?
We we get a lot of there's this like space traffic control, so we get alerts every time a satellite is going to whiz past us, and by whiz past us it's still a kilometer or 2 kilometers away, but in space it's close. And so like almost every other day we get like a conjunction analysis that there is a potential for clash with a Starlink satellite or some other satellite. Mostly it is Starlink satellite, but thankfully, either they can move out of the way or we can out of the way. And in most cases, we are passing a few kilometers away anyway. It's just like a risk-free thing that they do to just give us an alert. But we are in Starlink territory. But Starlinks now also operate a little bit lower. I think 500 to be precise. We're a little bit on the higher side, so it's not as crowded.
Yeah. Is there but does that come with, are you expecting these to last 5 or 7 years? Is there a deorbit date that you have in mind when one of these comes off a launch? Like, how long do you expect that to stay up?
7 years is what we've designed it for. So there's a design life. So we are hoping that on the minimum they stay up there for 7 years, and then the fuel runs out for them to be maintained. So we need to maintain the altitude for which most of the fuel is kept there. So that's 7 years. After that, we can still continue to operate the satellite as it keeps coming down. And so we also keep a small amount of fuel at the end for deorbiting purposes. So once, let's say, 7 years of operations at the same altitude, maybe 2 more years or 3 more years of operation as it's gradually reducing its altitude, and then as it gets towards 450 kilometers or 400 kilometers, and then we use the final bit of fuel remaining to bring it down completely to about 300 kilometers, and then it burns up in a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
So when you think of that from a sort of like a tech roadmap perspective, right? When you've got these 18 that you're going to launch, but the generation after that, when these are going to start deorbiting, how do you think about the timeline for what tech is going to go in that next run of satellites? Do you have some time to learn from this round and adapt to whatever you're going to build next, or what kind of lead time do you need to actually start constructing those?
Absolutely. So I think the 6 go up this year, then we will launch 12 more the next year and the year after that. And so by mid 2027, we will be completed with our first phase of the constellation, and then we are good for 5 years. We're not going to look at replacing them for the next 5 years. But what we will continue to do is we went from 30-meter resolution to 10 meters to 5 meters, and now we're trying to go from 5 meters to something much better, maybe 1 meter or sub-meter. So the next batch of satellites that we will replace, them won't just be 5-meter satellites. Maybe we will launch more 5-meter satellites as well, but along with those, we will get towards 1-meter satellites or something better where the resolution has gotten better now. But that's probably, we'll have 3 years or so to sort of figure out how to get there, because it's not immediate.
Yeah.
It's just such an interesting timeline where you're, it's, in the tech industry, it's like, I'm going to work on the next innovation and it'll be ready when it's ready. But with this kind of satellite constellation, it's like, well, I know the clock's running. So I've got 3 years to figure out what I can figure out before I got to start bending some metal.
I got to invent something in the next 3 years.
Yeah. There's a little bit more time pressure than like, man, I hope I can figure out how to make an iPad, It's like, there's a harder constraint on it in a really interesting way.
Yeah. Huh.
And then like, do you get, if you don't, if in the event, not you, I'm saying you, but not you in particular, right? But like, if a satellite designer, if you don't make enough progress on how good you can make the next version, do you just build the one that you just built again, because it's cheaper to run that again than it is to like kind of build a halfway completed new version?
If it's still printing money.
I think it'll be both. We will definitely replace the 5-meter satellites with more 5 meters, because the resolution requirements don't really change or not. The use case still remains the same. So 5-meter multispectral has been going on for the last 3 decades, right? And while there is better resolution imagery that's available on the market, the 5-meter imagery still sells. So you're right in the sense that we would keep on the machine for the 5-meter data to keep coming down. But at the same time, when we are trying to replace them, we would rather have something better and not just the same thing. But you can always launch the same thing if the technology hasn't reached a point where you can do something or something new hasn't been invented. So 5-meter, I think, as a resolution for multispectral or hyperspectral will always continue to remain the case, unless 1 meter or something better becomes so cheap and so ubiquitous that 5 meters, there's no point to it.
Right.
Yeah.
And then even then, it's an interesting mix where, maybe your kind of baseline monitoring, like you're talking about, stays 5 meter, but the opportunistic tasking satellites are at 1 meter, because if somebody wants a picture of what someone else on the Earth is up to, they probably want the most resolution possible, whereas monitoring environmental situations or changes over time is fine at 5 meters.
Yeah.
I guess the use cases aren't like, it's not objectively better to have higher resolution, presuming the costs aren't identical. So I guess, that's interesting. Yeah. Okay.
You feeling better about imagery, Jake?
I do.
Like I got around this a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, I'm thankful that we sort of danced around and didn't really get too deep into what hyperspectral is, because that was where I would have had my lunch taken from me. But
You still don't want to think about it too much.
we just make the assumption that we all know what we're talking about when we say hyperspectral, and then we can just move on to the business stuff. That was great. That's perfect for me.
It does sort of feel like trying to explain somebody the fourth and fifth dimension, right? Like
You're right. Yeah,
You're like,
exactly.
well, I know red, green, and blue. Like, is there more? How much more could there be? I can't imagine it with my mind's eye.
Like, well, what color is it? It's like, cannot answer
You
that.
read the Flatland story, I assume, right?
Oh,
Like
yeah,
that old
Edwin
stuff.
Abbott, yeah.
Yeah. And Jake, Flatland. You don't know
No.
about Flatland?
No.
Read it. It'll explain your struggles with hyperspectral imagery.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't even know if I could do a good Cliff Notes version. So there's like, where did it start? It started with like Line Man or whatever, right? And then circle goes through his plane of existence or something, and then
Okay.
globe goes through the circle's plane of existence. There's like the other shapes of other dimensions are passing through the other dimensions, other shapes dimension, in a way that they only see it. That's a whole thing. Just look it up. Read the
It's
freaking
kind of
book,
like
Peter.
a tesseract in Interstellar as well. It's like a 3D representation of time as the fourth dimension.
There it is. That's a better description. Yeah. Speaking of which,
Don't
I
like
watched
that.
that Lightyear movie last week with my son, and I realized Lightyear is just Interstellar made by Pixar. So
Wow.
check that out. That's the Buzz Lightyear origin story. It's just straight up what it is. So
All right.
yeah. See how that review sits for all the parents out there.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Well, Awais, this has been enlightening. It sounds like you're doing some really cool stuff. Congratulations on launching the Sats. That's awesome, and hopefully those customers start rolling in like crazy, and you can do some wacky stuff. And when you have the glow in the dark plants figured out, we'll have you back on, and we can
Totally.
can do that.
What's your hiring situation? Right, you said you've got presidents in India and in LA area. Should people be checking anything out? I'm sure a lot of the people that are listening are always looking for.
Yeah, we're
new
hiring
gigs.
in both places. So we hire pan US. We hire predominantly in Bangalore in India. We have roughly about 30 people in US right now in total, but they are in Los Angeles, they are in Colorado, they are in the Washington DC area. So I mean, if you're working on hardware, if you're working on image analysis, if you're working on business development, we're always looking for folks. And same in India, we're always looking for more satellite engineers and analysis engineers in Bangalore.
Cool. All right.
Check them out.
Nailed it.
Jake, I'm pulling up our calendar because we've time shifted this episode. So I believe next week, as you listen to this, Jason Snell is coming on the show, Jake. This is Anthony achieves a long-term dream of his own podcasting heroes coming on his podcast.
Yeah.
So look at that. We're completing the Off-Nominal crossover. We had Stephen Hackett, and then now we've got Jason Snell coming on, dusting off the old space takes from Jason. So I don't know if you've read a lot of Jason Snell in your life. I don't know how much of a
no, I listened to the
kind of
Liftoff for a bit, but yeah, I'm not into it like the way you are. So
you're not as much of an Appleman as I am.
No,
so, yeah.
no, that was the crossover that never reached me while that was all going on, right? So
yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well,
yeah,
that's what we got, folks. Awais, thanks again for hanging out with us. It's awesome.
Thank
I
you.
would love to have you back on to talk about the Indian space economy generally, because I would love your take on what's going on. We didn't talk about launch out of India at all. There's some launch startups happening. I would just be super intrigued to pick your brain. So we should do
Absolutely.
that next
This was
time.
very fun, very casual compared to most podcasts, and fun as well.
Thank you all so much.
Casual.
We'll see you later. Bye.
Bye everybody.
Bye.